Of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. A reading from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verses 4 onwards. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Therefore, you shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart and with your whole being and with your whole strength. Take to heart these words which I command you today. Keep repeating them to your children. Recite them when you are at home, when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them on your arm as a sign, and let them be a pendant on your forehead. Write them on the doorposts of your houses and on your gates. Let us pray. God our Father, we have come together as one family to listen to your word. As we are going to learn today the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, give us the grace to understand the text and understand the person that has been revealed in these books. As you accompanied Moses, you also continue to accompany us. That being guided by you, we may continue to guide other people. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Good. Once again, good evening to you. On behalf of the chairman, Most Reverend Dr. Anthony Sami Peter Abid, I extend to you a warm welcome to all of you present here, and a special welcome to the new students here who joined recently last week from Bangalore. So, hearty welcome to you. And to put things in order as we follow these days, we have 4 to 5:30 our class. So now it's 4 5. So we'll have the first hour till 4:50. Then we'll have 5 minutes break. Then again we'll continue for another 45 minutes. I'll be displaying the presentation. If you have any doubt on this presentation or on the explanation, kindly note and we'll discuss them at the end. And if you have any question on these four books, you may note and raise these questions at the end. Good. Here we go. So you could keep your video on or off, but I would request that you all of you kindly keep your audio muted. Now I share my screen with you. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
So the today's topic is books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. This is how we have arranged the lesson 4. When I sent this particular poster to our group members, many of them asked, Father, how can we have these four books in 1 hour or 2 hours? It would take a lot of time. And how we are going to discuss these four books? Would it be possible? I think it would be possible if we understand the core of these four message. And with that core, we'll begin the lecture. The outline of today's lecture is as follows. We'll be discussing these four books Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And we are taking some key texts from each book. And in the light of these key texts, we'll try to understand the entire book. These basic explanations I have left because the group that has come is already some level of basic learning is there. So we'll be only taking at an advanced level. As far as the book of Exodus is concerned, we are going to discuss call of Moses, plagues, Passover, crossing of the Red Sea, murmurings, and tabernacle. And as far as the Leviticus is concerned, we are going to discuss about the theme of holiness. From the book of Numbers, we'll be seeing three things Nazirite vows, how the spies went to the promised land, and what is the significance of the bronze serpent. And from Deuteronomy, we'll have Decalogue, Great Shema, that which we heard it read just now, blessings and curses, Song of Moses, and finally, choose God and live. You may have your Bible with you in case you would like to have a cross reference, you may do so. The first hour, that is till 4:50, we'll have Exodus and Leviticus. Then after the break, we'll continue with Numbers and Deuteronomy. And when we take these four books together, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, often the scholars say there is no clear demarcation possible. Even when we have to cut the book from Genesis, it is not possible because Genesis has two endings. One ending is like the people come to settle in Egypt, and then another ending is with the blessing of Jacob. But the book of Exodus begins, in fact, with after the names of the settlers. That's why Genesis they say two endings. And earlier we mentioned that discussion about Pentateuch, Tetrateuch, Hexateuch, Enneateuch. For example, we say the first five books, that is Pentateuch, from Genesis to Deuteronomy. But some scholars say Deuteronomy is an introduction to what follows. That is what follows after Joshua, Judges, till Second Kings. Because they say this particular book, Deuteronomy, gives a theological introduction. What is a theological introduction? It tells that if you obey the law, you will be punished. If you disobey, you will be cursed. And what follows in these books is only what follows is the paraphrasing of this particular theology. That's why they say Deuteronomy is not part of Pentateuch. So only we have Tetrateuch, that is four books. But some people say Hexateuch. Hexa means six. And how do they justify that? They say from Genesis we count till Joshua. The argument is very simple because in Genesis, God promises land to Abraham, and in Exodus, from Exodus to Deuteronomy, people are walking towards the promised land. And what happens in Joshua? People own the promised land. That's why the theme of land connects all these six books. So they call, instead of Pentateuch, they call it as Hexateuch. But there is again a third group of people. They say it's not Pentateuch, it's not Tetrateuch, it is not Hexateuch, but Enneateuch. Ennea is 9. They say their argument is land is gained in Joshua, but people, when they were exiled to Babylon, the land is lost. The loss of land is described in Second Kings. That's why they say Genesis to Second Kings, the entire set has to be taken together and they name it as Enneateuch. But we take the regular argument of Pentateuch. Pentateuch we divide into two, that is Genesis. The next set is Exodus to Deuteronomy. How do we justify this division? This division we justify on account of these reasons. Number one, the tent of meeting discourse extends. In Exodus, what happens? Like at the end of the book, God's glory comes down to the tent of meeting and remains there. And from there, God continues to talk till the Deuteronomy. That is the beginning of Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy, Moses takes over. Otherwise, the discourse continues. That's why they say it's not only Exodus, but since the discourse continues, we can take these three books together. And the second argument is they say Moses is the hero of all these four books. In fact, Exodus talks about Moses' birth, Deuteronomy talks about Moses' death. And earlier in Genesis, we have two histories. The first one is primeval history, that's about the origin of the world and origin of human persons. Then second part, we have patriarchal history about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's one part. So now Moses becomes the hero of this particular set of four books from Exodus to Deuteronomy. His birth, marriage, his call, carrying out this task of liberating people, his leadership for 40 years. All these things are mentioned here. That's why we are taking these four books together. And thirdly, people of Israel become God's people through covenant on Mount Sinai. Earlier, when Jacob was chosen and Jacob was given a new name, Israel, only the particular people of God, like people of Israel, they develop. But people of Israel become people of God only after the covenant. And that covenant happens here on Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus. But that covenant motive continues till Deuteronomy, where reiterating what happened earlier, Moses tells that again God has given us the new law, the second law. And that second law is the symbolism of God's covenant. And this theme of covenant also connects these four books. That's why we are taking these four books together. Now let's get into the book of Exodus. The word Exodus is used in Greek Bible. The meaning is going forth from Egypt. Now this has become a secular word in the sense that even in the Hindu newspaper or Indian Express we come across this word where when there is a mass movement of people, they call it as an exodus. For example, a group of people leave Ukraine during the time of war and they come to other European countries. They call a great exodus happened after this war or during this war. Because the exodus simply means a mass movement of the people. Today, in fact, we are celebrating our Migrants Sunday. So naturally, this exodus talks about migration. People migrate from Egypt to the promised land, but they do not enter the promised land, but at least that they're about to enter. But this migration also is a liberation. Oftentimes, that's why people say there is no salvation. There is no salvation without the exodus. That's why people have to constantly move out of the place. Unless and otherwise they move from their own place, there is no salvation possible. And this exodus is migration. This migration means liberation. And this particular migration is historical because it happens during the time of reign of Ramesses II, the Pharaoh. So it's not like something we have a theological story in the Bible, but this really has happened, and we have evidences from Egyptian literature, like where how a particular group of people left Egypt. So that's why it's a historical event, not a theological event. Thirdly, the context. To begin with the context, the people are prolific. Earlier, if you see in Genesis, barrenness is the motive. Barrenness in the sense Sarah is not able to give birth, Rebecca is not able to give birth, Rachel is not able to give birth. Their barrenness was the problem, but in Exodus, prolific birth, that is, people were multiplying. That was the problem. There's a set in the context. And before that, we have a mention that a Pharaoh who came, who didn't know about Joseph, began to torment the people. This usually happens in any institution. Like one person sets everything up and another person comes, he does not know anything about the previous thing, then there is a collapse of the institution. Same thing happens in Egypt. The new person does not know Joseph, and now he has to find these ways out. And he tries to, this particular Pharaoh is afraid because people are becoming numerous. And what would happen in case there is an attack from enemies? These Israelites would join the enemies and would destroy. That is the fear Pharaoh has. And Pharaoh employs three methods to control this population or to control this prolific growth of people of Israel. Number one, through hard toil. In the sense, he gives the taskmaster the role to harden the work that they are doing. So, what would be the result? Like people become tired and there will be no childbirth. That's the first way of controlling. But that fails. Secondly, he employs another method through midwives. He tells that you to instruct the midwives, like when you assisted the women of Israel during their childbirth, if you find that particular baby to be a boy, immediately kill it. And if it's a girl, allow it to live. So that they want to control the seed of Israel. That's the second. But that also fails because through two midwives, God acts benevolently towards the people of Israel and they are God fearing. And here also we have mentioned that even the Egyptian people also were fearing the God of Israel. That's how God of Israel becomes a universal God. Thirdly, the Pharaoh employs another strategy that all the male babies have to be thrown into the river Nile and the girl children could be led alive. These three problems are, so these three ways Pharaoh tries to control the numerous population. But what happens? Our hero escapes. So this particular hero is saved motive is found in many literature. We have in Gideon, in Judges, we have 8, where Gideon has 71 children. 70 children are killed by Abimelech, but one Jotham escapes. In the Mahabharata, we have more or less a similar story where Karnan is thrown into the river because Karna will be saved because he will be a hero later. So hero is saved is like it's a regular motive. That's the motive is employed by Matthew also in the gospel. When the infants, during the infancy narratives, when Herod the Great wants to kill all the babies, hero escapes. And this particular motive is present in many literature. And the author of Exodus makes use of this particular literary element to bring forth to the audience that Moses was very extraordinary. That's how Moses is introduced. Now let's get into the call of Moses. Call of Moses, like any other call story, has 5 elements. Number one, problem. Number two, God calls someone. Third one, the person who is called hesitates. Number four, there is a sign. Number five, acceptance of the call. So this is called a type scene. Type scene means a pattern which gets continuously repeated. For example, we have the case of Mary. Mary is called. Look at the same steps will be there. There is a problem. What is the problem? The salvation of the human persons. Then God's called someone. Who is called? Mary is called. Hesitation. How does Mary show her hesitation? She tells that I do not know the man. So how can this be? So that kind of hesitation, she raises the question. And fourth, God gives a sign through angel Gabriel. What is the sign? Like your relative Elizabeth was barren, is now going to beget a child. And fifthly, acceptance of the call. Mary surrenders to the angel. Let it be according to your word. This is how a call scene is set. Here, now the problem in Exodus is people have to be liberated. God calls someone. Who is that someone? Moses. Moses hesitates 5 times. Usually in all other call stories, for example, call of Jeremiah, he tells only once, I am a boy. And you call of Isaiah. Isaiah tells, I have unclean lips. So these people have only one hesitation. Even Mary has only one hesitation. But when it comes to Moses, 5 times he hesitates. What is the theological meaning behind is very simple. Like Moses does not ascribe this leadership on his own. If he were to accept what it would mean, like he came on his own and he wanted to portray himself at the center, and that would be like Moses centered, it would become. But here, the entire story of salvation is God centered. That's why when God invites, human persons hesitate because the responsibility is very high. That is why we have the call of Moses is very, very significant. That is why to portray the significance of it or to portray the importance of it, the author makes him hesitate 5 times. For example, he tells, I am a stammerer, and you send someone else. So I am inadequate. All these types of hesitations are mentioned by Moses. Then number 4, God gives a sign. What is the sign? The sign is simple, twofold sign. Number 1, he tells, throw the staff, then the staff will turn into serpent. Then put your hands into your cassock and you take it out, it becomes leprous. These 2 signs are there. Finally, Moses accepts the call. Here, suppose we apply the same to our own life. One side, we have a goal for our life. On the other side, God has a purpose. Let's take the example of Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa, when she came to Calcutta, she had a goal. What is the goal? To become a primary school teacher. That was her goal. But God had a different purpose. What was the purpose? To make her a missionary of mercy. Suppose we have a secular example, Mahatma Gandhi. His goal was to become a barrister in Africa. But God, in a way, had a different purpose. Like he would be a liberator, a freedom fighter. In our own life also, on the one side we have a goal, on the other side we have a God's purpose. When they both align together, the change happens. So Moses had a goal. What was his goal was very, very, very minimum or a kind of very limited goal, like shepherding the cattle of his father-in-law. But God had a purpose of making him a great person, a great liberator. Even in the coming to the Second Testament, the calling of the disciples have a goal of fishing. But Jesus has a different goal. I will make you fishers of men. That's where they identify God's purpose. I think like Moses, we need to also find out what God has for us as our purpose. When God's purpose and our goal, they meet, then the change begins. That could be the lesson from Call of Moses. And this is a scene here. We have one expression, was burning but not consumed. So here Moses sees this particular bush burning but not consumed. So this is this particular thing, it in a way attracts Moses so that he goes towards that. And this particular was burning but not consumed. Not only here, this particular theme continues till the end. Like Moses' zeal was burning but not consumed by people's murmurings. And that can go on. Like this becomes a particular theology. That's why Even this is taken as in American college, this is a motto like was burning but not consumed. In the sense, the life zealiness should be always burning but not consumed. It means it should be always burning without being extinguished. That's the first story. Coming to the second, the 10 plagues. So here the key theme is I do not know the Lord. So here, when Moses thinks that he accepts the call, he goes to Egypt and he goes to the Pharaoh, and Pharaoh simply very little or in a very simplistic way he tells, I do not know the Lord whom you are talking. So the entire plague narrative is centered on this one word, knowing. Whether Pharaoh will know the Lord. That's the question. And to answer these 10 plagues, at the end of the 10th plague, Pharaoh realizes or Pharaoh knows. So from not knowing the Lord, there is a movement towards knowing the Lord. That's how we need to understand the 10 plagues. So 10 plagues are not merely for portraying the 10 plagues, but there is a theology behind. Like from not knowing the Lord, we move towards knowing the Lord. This particular 10 plagues we have also narrated in Psalm 78, Psalm 105, but we have only 7 plagues there. So based on this, some authors, they say whether really 10 plagues were there or 7 plagues were there and they were later into converted to 10, we are not sure. Pharaoh's heart is hardened. So often people ask why Pharaoh's heart has to become hardened. So here the reason is very simple. Like in our Bible, we have 2 theologies. One theology is destination, predestination. What is the predestination? Predestination or determinism. God fixes everything like a fate. We can't change anything. But on the other hand, there is freedom, free will. So here the implication is it's not like that everything is fixed by God, determined by God, that through his intervention people will be liberated. No, there is always a role for human agency. In the sense, human persons always can say yes or can say no. This particular theme of freedom continues till the end. Even in Deuteronomy, we have God places before us life and death. We just choose. It's up to us to be free and choosing. And Pharaoh's heart is hardened because he failed to choose the Lord, but he wanted to choose what he was thinking. That's why his heart is hardened. And in a few places, God makes it hardened. Later places, it becomes hardened by itself. In the sense, once you are not able to soften it, naturally it becomes like it's how the way nature takes it. That's a very beautifully portrayed here in the narrative. Then oftentimes people, when they read about the 10 plagues, they ask the question, why does God punish the Egyptians? How can God kill the firstborn? Especially when you watch the movie 10 Commandments or when you watch the movie Exodus, the particular scene of babies being killed, even though the Pharaoh was an oppressor, and the Pharaoh carries his own little child, the boy, the promising boy will later become a Pharaoh, but the boy is killed. So naturally, anyone who views the movie tends to feel, how could God be this much violent? And how can he take away the lives of the little children? And how do we understand that? We need to understand at 2 levels. Number one, we have a universal concept of God. So what is that universal concept? Like God is all loving, God is all powerful, God is all merciful. So he shows mercy to all. That's a universal concept of God. That's one thing. On the other hand, we have a local concept of God. What is the local concept? Local concept is that God has to take care of particular good. For example, I have a debt. So maybe debt of 1 lakh, we say. And another person, I'm indebted to somebody. I have borrowed money. So somehow that problem is that I'm not able to pay back. So what I go and pray to the Lord, you at least save me from this debt. But the person who gave me money also will go and pray to the Lord, make that person give my money back. Now both are there. So now how does God answer? Suppose God answers my prayer, means how do I understand there? Though God is universal, though God is benevolent to the borrowed one and the borrower and the lender, but still one person is favored, means that particular person's local God experience. So here, universally, God is all powerful, all loving, all merciful. But as a local God, he supports the people of Israel because he is the God of the people of Israel. So, in fact, in the story, what we have a conflict between two gods, Egyptian God and God of Israel. And ultimately, God of Israel wins. So, this is like a warrior motive that they had in ancient literature. So that's how in this background we need to understand. So that's why we don't say that God is violent or God is unjust. No, God is just, but he takes the side of the oppressed people. And when he takes the side of the oppressed people, naturally he has to offend the oppressor. That's what is narrated in these 10 plagues. And these are the 10 plagues. Number one, waters turn to blood, then frogs, then lice or gnats, flies, then disease on livestock, unhealable boils, hail and fire, locusts, darkness, and finally death of firstborn. So here some people say, like in a few instances, the water will turn into red in Nile in some seasons. So some say these plagues were not really worked by God; they were naturally happening. That's how in the movie Exodus, it's how it's portrayed. Like these plagues were natural events. So they say like because natural events have been taken and biblical or theological meaning is given. But we understand it like this is the work of God and work of Moses, work of Aaron. These three people together they do or they work out these 10 plagues. And the final plague is the death of firstborn. Let's go to the next one, Passover and others. Once the plague stop and Pharaoh rushes people so that they would go away. And then what happens afterwards is a crossing of the Red Sea. Before that, we have this particular Passover. What is this Passover? Passover, we call it as Pascha or Pesa, Paschal celebration, we call it Easter. So simply it means to pass over. It would mean two things. Number one, I cross. I cross means suppose here the context is this, like God is sending an angel of death, and that person will be going one house after another, and that person crosses. Crosses means he pass over means like he goes on when there is an Israelite house, he will pass over means he will ignore that house and he will go to the next door. That is called passing over. Suppose I go through a file, different files are there. I go through some files, then I pass over some file means just I ignore the files and I go to other. That's called passing over. Another meaning is crossing. So this Passover also refers to the crossing of the Red Sea. When we take the same term and apply to our Christian Passover, when we celebrate Easter, we celebrate the Passover of two things. Number one, Jesus crosses from death to resurrection, to life. That's the first crossing. Second one, with Jesus, when we participate in the suffering of the cross, we also go to the other side. Or we also cross towards from death we go to life, or from sin we go to virtue. This is how we apply this meaning and make it Christian. And this Passover is a shepherd feast, like the people who were rearing cattle. So Passover. And closely connected to that is unleavened bread. So in the book of Exodus in chapter 14, we have these two feasts together, Passover and unleavened bread. Unleavened bread is a feast of agriculture. So here, in fact, two types of trades. So the basic trades of humanity, shepherding on the one side, agriculture on the other side. So maybe people of Israel, first they were nomads, shepherds. Later after they become settled in the promised land, they become people of agriculture. I think some stories have been mixed up here. But Paul gives a different meaning when it comes to unleavened bread. So he tells the leaven. Leaven refers to whatever is our own bodily thing is leaven. So he tells like Christ the Passover lamb is killed. So you remove all leaven from your place, which means we need to keep only unleavened bread, the purity. So he emphasizes in the First Corinthians when he talks about different dissensions in the community, different moral sexual aberrations in the community. So he takes this particular symbolism and tries to tell them whatever these are all leavens we need to get away, the yeast that you need to remove from the community, and you keep it as unleavened bread. This is how Paul gives a different interpretation in the Second Testament. And thirdly, close to these two feasts are the third one is consecration of the firstborn. This comes in the context of fertility cult. So fertility cult, in the sense the people of Israel were influenced by other cults of their own times. According to the fertility cult, in order to have more children, or in order to have more cattle, or in order to have more crops, what they will do, they will have this fertility cult celebrated in a temple. So what is the meaning? And once you go through the particular worship and you get your cattle multiplied, or you get a baby's born, you take the firstborn baby and offer it to God. That particular thing, that's why we have in Luke also, Jesus, the firstborn of Mary, is being offered in the temple. And again, the baby is brought back through these two turtle doves. So that particular religious element emerges from here, consecration of the firstborn, because God takes the life of the firstborn, which means the firstborn have a new, unique place, and that particular theme, the religious ritual also emerges in this context. And coming to a Christian understanding, we always understand Passover lamb as Christ. So it's a very beautiful picture. Like we have two portraits. Look on the right side, that's here, we have a pole. Here we have cross. So according to John's gospel, Jesus died as a lamb. So that's how John the Baptist introduces Jesus. Jesus, the lamb who was killed on the cross. On the same Passover day, this Paschal lamb of Jesus is killed. And look at the chalice here. This particular chalice represents, one is our Christian celebration of the Eucharist. Secondly, they take the blood and they apply on the doorpost. That way it refers to the First Testament narrative. So here we have an altar. So the altar where the lamb was sacrificed earlier. So, but in the book of Exodus, it's not really altar. They just sacrifice in their own. They don't sacrifice, but they just kill the goat or kill the lamb and they celebrate. So this is how this particular picture, through this symbol of lamb, brings both the Second Testament and the First Testament together. Now we go to the next one, crossing of the Red Sea. Some people argue this is not Red Sea, this is Reed Sea. Even in our own regional translations, if you see, the previous translations will have a Red Sea. But the later translation, they have Reed Sea. But this is how we read the Hebrew text. That's the problem there. So here it's mentioned 600,000 men. But some say like 600,000 men might not have been in the whole earth that time. Maybe this might have been a hyperbole, exaggeration, but we are not sure. But the key theme here is, fear not, stand firm, the Lord will fight for you. This is a very beautiful spiritual expression. How? Here all along people of Israel are in Egypt. For about 400 years, they are in slavery. They are in slavery means they know only to make bricks. They don't know other than making bricks, they don't know anything. Maybe they might know to rear cattle. So these people never knew warfare. If they at all involved in warfare, it might have been a really miserable time for them. That's why the Lord is telling, you just be still. You just be relaxed. Nothing you do. Just you be a observer. You be a passerby, because I will fight for you. That's a very good spiritual insight we can get. Oftentimes, we try to employ our own warfare when it comes to our material success, our spiritual success. We tend to say, okay, because of my ability, I can do, because of my talent, because of my skill, I do. But often what happens, we end up miserably bad, or we make a mess out of the situation. At times, we need to just be still and see how God fights for us. So the bottom line is very simple. Whether passage was through a sea, a lake, or a lagoon, God had delivered Israel from the clutches of the largest lion in the world, Egypt. So what is destruction to Egyptians is life to Israelites. Look at the picture here. Like this is the Red Sea, and it's highly impossible to cross this Red Sea because it's very deep and it's very wide. So people say, scholars say, they might have crossed here, like a little lake or a lagoon or a pond, like they might have crossed here, some people say. Or they say it might have referred to this particular small piece of Red Sea. But whatever be, one thing is very sure, like people were here slaves, but now here they are liberated. And that particular experience was possible for them only because of God. And that becomes the foundational experience. So it's not mere experience, foundational experience. And the climactic statement of this crossing of the Red Sea is very beautiful. The people feared the Lord and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Till here, people were fearing the Pharaoh. So from now on, they will fear only the Lord. That's the beauty of the crossing of the Red Sea. So they cross from one experience to another experience. This could happen in our own spiritual life as well. Coming to the last but one, post-crossing events. Like as soon as they cross, what happens? Different crises emerge. What are the crises? Number one, the bitter waters at Mara. The water is very bitter. People are not able to drink. The need for sufficient quantities of food. Are able to view?
Yes, Father.
Yes, Father.
Okay, we have power cut here. Okay, good. The second one is need for sufficient quantities of food, like people where we did not have enough food. Thirdly, lack of drinking water at Rephidim. Fourth one, invasion of the Amalekites. Then fifth one, Moses also faces ill health. He has exhaustion, weary hands. Here we have Amalekites. Then hectic appointments. So two things we'll note. Number one, invasion of the Amalekites. So in that war, what happens? Like Joshua is fighting down with the people. Moses is there on the mountain. So Moses is lifting his hands like this. So whenever his hands were lifted, people were winning. And whenever his hands went down, and immediately people are beginning to lose. So now a strategy is being used and they keep their hands always raised. Moses' hands are raised as we have in this picture here. Moses' hands are raised. So in a way, it tells like one way God is gracious or God gives the land as a promised land as a gift. On the other hand, people have to really fight. So more Joshua is fighting and people are fighting. So which means our salvation or our spiritual life entails both things. One side grace of God, another side our own words. And another beautiful insight we have is like being connected. So through his hands raised, he gets connected to God. So how often do we raise our hands when we do our work? Oftentimes our hands are only this much. Like I work with my computer, or work with my files, or work with my car, or work with my study table. This means our hands are not raised more than this. But once our hands are raised this much, we get energy from God and the work becomes very easy. And these two intelligent persons find, so this is the connection that we need to make. And another story is here we have Jethro. So Moses has this problem, like a problem of being perfect. That's why he tells like all the problems he wants to save, he wants to settle. So one day this particular Jethro, Moses' father-in-law comes and he looks at Moses being busy and he hears about how Moses has been great and God has used him to bring the people of Israel from the bondage of. So that is he is a priest and naturally that attracts him. He wants to see Moses and how the things have come. And he comes to the wilderness and he sees Moses is there inside. Many people are sitting outside because they have little quarrels and they want to settle and everything. Moses has to come and settle. And Jethro looks at this and tells that if you do like this, you spoil your health and people also get tired. For example, morning 8 o'clock, some people come with their babies or women or weak patients like that. Until the evening, they have to wait for your word means then they lose, they get frustrated. So what he tells, you select some people and delegate your work, like in charge of 10, in charge of 100, in charge of 1,000, and you deal with only the 10 people. So he gives, or he in fact tells Moses about the art of delegation. Like you control 10 people, they will control 100 people, they will control 1,000 people. So people are also able to go fast and you also have a relaxed way of doing things. And here another beautiful insight is Moses was humble to accept this old man's, Jethro's insight. Because often Moses might have very well told, who are you to say, like, I know God worked through me, God talked to me, I am better than you, or you are a priest, what do you know, I am a prophet. So nothing of that sort. He immediately obeys. That particular humility always attracts from the person of Moses. Though he was talking to God face to face, he was humble enough to get a old person's advice. That's really beautiful that we have from the chapter 18. This is the story of Jethro. Then last one in the book of Exodus, with this we'll take a pause. Tabernacle and tent of meeting. Like God tells, like we have to build a tabernacle. Tabernacle is not like the Eucharistic tabernacle that we have in our churches, but it's real tabernacle means it's a kind of a tent, like a meeting place. So tent of meeting, so we have here. So this is the tabernacle I'm talking. The tent of meeting. Look here, we have many tents. So people are here living in tents, and in the middle of their village or their settlement, they have this tent of meeting. This is now built by Moses. And here inside we have the Ark of the Covenant, the tabernacle. There God's glory comes and resides. Good, we resume. So we'll begin with the tabernacle because there I think connection went up there. So I was telling tabernacle and tent of meeting. So this is the last theme that we have from the book of Exodus. Here, the tabernacle. By tabernacle, we don't mean the Christian or Catholic tabernacle where we reserve the Eucharist, but this is a place of staying. So, in fact, the understanding is simple. Like Christ resides there in tabernacle. And some say this particular tabernacle or construction of tent of meeting is very fictional. Why? Because this making of this tabernacle, as we have here, this is the tent of meeting. They have a boundary, and inside this is a tabernacle. For that, they had used how much of gold? 1900 pounds of gold, then 6437 pounds of silver, 4522 pounds of bronze. Did they really have carpentry skills? Because they were not carpenters. Maybe because of this later influence, Solomonic temple, on account of this, they say, like, this is a representation of Solomonic temple. And now, after the conquest, the tabernacle disappears. So this also, these people are very curious when the government of Israel announces that anyone who has some hint about this tabernacle, they'll be really be awarded very much. But now the implication is very simple. Be it fictional or real, God is the architect, no delegation. He himself builds everything. And there is divine revelation because God comes and resides with the people. Tabernacle intensifies, completes, and extends Mount Sinai. God continues to dwell among the people. The materials are collected through voluntary offerings, and even Moses tells it's enough, no more of offerings. This is how the book ends. So the final line in the story is very good. The cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. If you look at the beginning of the book of Exodus, people were slaves, people were in bondage, they were in Egypt, but now they are in the wilderness, but now God's glory is there. Earlier, Pharaoh's glory was there, now God's glory. They need to only fear the Lord and they need to only obey the Lord. That concludes our first book, Leviticus. We have taken 6 themes. Exodus, we have taken themes. Now we go to the second book of our study today, Leviticus. That's very simple. It's centered on only one word, holiness. To understand holiness, we again come to this picture. So the holiness in the book of Leviticus is centered on this tent of meeting. So whatever comes closer to the tent of meeting is holy. Whatever is away from the tent of meeting is polluted or unholy. For example, a priest enters into the tent of meeting. That person has to be holy. A leprosy inflicted person can never come here because that person is unholy. And naturally, not necessarily it's a religious thing because people consider as contagious and there was no medicine available, and that's why it was called unholy. And people who had bodily discharges, they also could not come near the temple. So they were kept aloof, they were kept away. So whatever comes close to the temple or close to the tabernacle, close to the tent of meeting is holy. So based on this particular holiness is developed the theme of sacrifice. There are two types of sacrifices that are narrated in Leviticus: voluntary sacrifices, mandatory sacrifices. Voluntary sacrifice of three types: burnt offering or holocaust, cereal offering, peace offering. Mandatory sacrifices: sin offering, guilt offering, and sacrificial instruction to priests and people. If you look at these sacrifices, they are merely to restore our relationship with God. That's the main thing. Like when we sin against God, we become alien or we become going away from God. And through sacrifices, we come closer to God. That was the understanding. Then we have priestly ordination that is described in the book of Leviticus. Ordination simply means setting someone in order. If you look at any papal mass or any procession in the mass, you look at the how the order is arranged, the entrance, the ceremony is arranged. Maybe initially the gospel, that means the deacon carries the gospel, then the altar servants are there, then the readers are there, priests are there, then bishops are there, then finally we have again deacons, then we have our Holy Father presiding. So here, in fact, what happens during the ordination is one person's order is set, like you be here. That is called ordained. So that order, that person has to remain in that order. It also means consecration. But in the book of Judges, we have a different understanding. It's a filling of hands. During the ordination, what happens? God fills the hands of a priest. So that's why we have the chalice, we have the book of gospel that filling our hands. This is how we understand from the book of Judges. But here it means consecration. And we have day of atonement, again coming to God. Then again feasts and festivals repeated like sacrifices earlier. Then we have great jubilee. We'll not take up holiness here. Look at these pictures. These two pictures, they refer to Day of Atonement. In every year, people of Israel, till they had the temple, this particular custom. What is the custom? Once a year, they will have year of atonement. They called it as Yom Kippur. Kippur means covering. The tabernacle, they had a covering, and Yom means a day, day of covering. On this day, what they do, they take a goat, and the blood of the goat is poured on the covering, Kippur. That's how we understand the feast. This is celebrated this way. Look here, we have two pictures. Left side, we have a high priest. Only the high priest can enter on this day into the Holy of Holies to access that Kippur. Otherwise, nobody will enter into the enter into the Holy of Holies. And first, he has to sacrifice a bull. So for a priest sins, first of all, he has to make a sacrifice. After that, he will bring two goats. So one goat will be offered. One goat will be offered. Another goat, what it will be let into the people's neighborhood, the streets. So when this particular goat when goes here, people will be either spitting on it or they will pull the hair, and finally this particular goat will be left into the wilderness, and that's how they understood that there the demon was, evil spirits were dwelling. So when we compare the same, the Yom Kippur, these two lambs refer to Jesus. One side he was sacrificed, and he, as a high priest, entered into the Holy of Holies according to the book of Hebrews. On the other hand, he was being mocked at by people, and he went around the street, and finally he went into the wilderness, that's Mount Calvary, and he died. So this particular symbolism of Yom Kippur is very much present in the passion narratives. So based on this, like people, why had this, they had this feast means people wanted to be holy. So it's like a restoring, like a factory setting a mobile phone. Once a year, they will reset their life and they will begin to live a new life because they wanted to be holy. Thus, holiness becomes the central theme in the book of Leviticus. Now we go to the third book, that is Numbers. So from here we take some themes. Number one, Nazirite vows and Aaron's blessings. Nazirite vows we have in chapter 6 of Numbers. We have here this particular Nazir. Samson was a Nazir, Samuel was a Nazir, John the Baptist was a Nazir. Means offered to God. It simply means Nazir means to something reserved to God, vowed to God. This could be both lifelong and temporary. It has three restrictions: abstain from wine or strong drink, vinegar, grapes, grape juice, not to cut hair, and to avoid contact with the dead, open to all genders. So we have Samson. Samson, in fact, breaks the Nazirite vows. Earlier, he has a wedding party. There, he might have broken this particular vow. Secondly, his hair is cut in the end. Then he contacts with the dead, that is the dead lion, the carcass of the lion he approaches, and from there he takes honey. So that's how Nazirite vows are being trespassed by Samson. But coming to the next major theme, Aaron's blessings. We have 6:24 to 26. Here we have very beautifully. So this is the text that we have. This particular text we read every year on January 1, the New Year day. The first reading is from the book of Numbers, Aaronic blessing. So here the Lord bless you and keep you. But in Hebrew, it's only three words: one, two, three. And the second blessing is five words: one, two, three, four, five. Third blessing, seven words: four plus three. So, which means God's blessing grows from three to five, five to seven. So, seven and three, they were considered as sacred numbers and full numbers. So, from fullness, God takes you to fullness. And again, another thing, the Lord bless you. So it means it comes from outside. Lord make shine his face upon you, be gracious to you. That is something, it becomes mind, mental. Then third one, it becomes something to do with heart. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. So which means in totality, the Lord blesses you completely. That is the meaning of Aaron's blessings. Then we have another theme, spies to the promised land. We have in Numbers 13, 1 to 33. Like here we have, this is the picture. So Moses sends some spies to the promised land because before getting in, they want to just have a look what it looks like. So here they give a bunch of grapes, and a little bunch of grapes, two persons have to carry, which means it's a way, one way it could be literal, like the land was very rich and even a bunch of grapes was weighing very heavily. So this could be one meaning. Second meaning could be like it's a hyperbole, saying that the land was very rich or people, really God was giving a great thing. So we are not sure whether it's literal or literary. More often we can say it's only figurative. But what is important here is, to Moses, two reports are brought. One group of people, the majority, they say, we can't have the promised land because the people here are very strong. And on the other hand, Caleb and Joshua, they come, only two persons, they come with another report, they saying that we can. But the beauty that is implied here is, these people, the majority, they were thinking of their own strength, or they forgot that God was doing great things for them. But here, only Caleb and Joshua remembered, like it's not that God, it's not we that who possess the promised land, but God. That's how they have their trust in God. So maybe the question that could be put to ourselves for our own spiritual reflection is, who do we depend on? Do we depend on God or do we depend on ourselves? Oftentimes we depend on ourselves, and that's why the promised land becomes a frightening thing for us. Then next one we go to murmurings and bronze serpent. This is the last theme that we have in Numbers. Different people murmur. Aaron and Miriam, then people. The implication is leader is rejected by his own people. But here, what is a murmuring? Murmuring is somewhere in between silence and shouting. So suppose you are angry with somebody, you shout at that person. That is called shouting. Or you keep quiet. That is silence. But in between, we have a murmuring. Murmuring is very dangerous because murmuring happens among people, and murmuring begets gossips, and murmuring will have different ways of doing things. That's why murmuring is very dangerous in the book of Numbers. But still, people were murmuring against Moses, and Moses is trying to control. So this is the picture we have about another one, bronze serpent. Here we have people murmur against Moses, and God sends serpents, and Moses is putting up a bronze serpent. Bronze serpent. Moses is putting a bronze serpent, and those who look at this all saved. Good. So this story we know how. I think somebody has unmuted. So could you? Okay. We go to the last one, Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy. The first theme that we are going to take is Decalogue and Golden Calf. These two narratives, in fact, we have in Exodus, but the better one or the refined text we have in Deuteronomy. So we have Exodus 20, 1 to 7, Deuteronomy 5, 1 to 10, 20. So this we call it as 10 commandments or Decalogue, 10 words. Let's look at these two texts. The first four commandments are vertical in orientation, that is towards God, while the last six are horizontal towards human persons. And what is the greatest command? The greatest command is love of God in Deuteronomy 6, love of neighbor, that's Leviticus 19:18. And we have golden calf, temptation to idolatry. So these two things, let's take here. The Decalogue, how do we understand the Decalogue today? Decalogue today in the New Testament is understood as the summary, love of God, love of neighbor, that we have beautifully in Luke 10. And coming to the golden calf story, temptation to idolatry. Like God saved the people of Israel, but people were going after golden calf. And all throughout life, till the Babylonian exile, they had this idolatry. Idolatry was a great problem for them. Look at this. We have these two together. On the one hand, we have Decalogue. On the other hand, we have golden calf. Here, Moses is the center. Here, Aaron. And Aaron also, in a way, yields to the pressures of the people. But what stands out beautiful here in this narrative is when God wanted to kill the people of Israel, Moses intercedes for them. So Moses reminds God about his steadfastness, about his faithfulness, and that way Moses becomes a great leader. That way, this particular story, on the one hand, shows how people were unfaithful. On the other hand, it shows how Moses was reminding about God's faithfulness. Let's go to the next one, Great Shema. The Shema Israel. Shema means here. We have in Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. This particular text is later taken by Jesus as well, the greatest command. Look at these pictures here. So here is a Jew who wears this here, this Deuteronomy 6:4 here. Deuteronomy 6:4 is worn here because God is telling like you wear it whenever you are, wherever you are. Then we have here, it's on the doorpost. So people can place this on the doorpost. This they took literally, but what is mentioned here is like God is giving a greatest commandment. Next thing that is to be taken here is blessings and curses. So the book of Deuteronomy, this is called the second law, Deuteronomos. Here we have, first of all, before entering into blessings and curses, we look here. God warns them about four temptations that they may face. So the first problem is, let memory fail you, because you will forget that whatever I did for you, and you may think that are all things were done by you. Remember, do not forget. Second one, let vanity possess you, like your vanity, your heart becomes proud. Third one, let prosperity intoxicate you, like you become prosperous and that intoxicates, like in the gospel reading that we heard the from today, that rich man was intoxicated by his riches. That's why he was not able to see Lazarus who was at the door. And finally, let security deceive you, like I have my own gods, they will take care of me. These four temptations are mentioned here, and these four temptations are to be overcome by the people. And here they have many blessings and curses. For example, they say, like, you will be wandering in a place where whose language you will not know. That's a curse. But that curse actually was their life in exile. So some people say these curses were written after the Babylonian exile. Like people experienced different hardships, and these hardships are put as curses in the book of Deuteronomy. Then we have Song of Moses, Deuteronomy 32, 1 to 43. It's a very beautiful text where it more or less summarizes the entire salvation history and tells what is to come. So from the point of view of, I'll pause here. I have electricity back. Just turn. Somebody has unmuted. Okay, good. Song of Moses, Deuteronomy 32, 1 to 43. So here I was telling this particular song is called Inset Hymn. So what is an inset hymn? Inset hymn is set between two narratives. So like narrative, prose is there. Then suddenly we have poetry. Then again another narration. So what is the use of this inset hymn is, in this inset hymn beautifully summarizes what has gone before and introduces what follows after. So we have two major inset hymns in the Pentateuch. The first one is Exodus 15, where after they were liberated from the land of Egypt, they crossed the Red Sea and they did the Song of Moses, the victorious song of victory. But later, at the end of Deuteronomy, we have a Song of Moses, where Moses recalls all the beautiful things that happened during the wilderness experience and tries to tell the people. And here it summarizes what has gone before and it introduces what is going to come. How? Look at the text here. A contrast between the nature of God and nature of his people. He is the rock, they are on the rocks, are following the wrong rock. So two natures. One, he is the rock. God is the rock means God is steadfast. God is firm. His steadfastness remains firm. His faithfulness remains firm. On the other hand, people are very feeble. There is very they go after this, they go after their God, so their mind is not stable. So that they go like water they go, but on the other hand, God is the rock. They are going after wrong rocks, the false rocks. They are the false gods. So the two natures are portrayed. Then we have two speakers, God, Moses, God, and Moses. So it goes like a dialogue, it goes like a lawsuit. We have some key metaphors: rock, God, steadfastness, and apple of the eye. So this again later up in the Psalms. Like this preciousness of Israel. Israel is very precious in the eyes of God. And we have eagle symbolism, God's protective providence. And later we have Moses in Deuteronomy 30. And finally, to tell about not about Moses, we know that the text beautifully tells like Moses is taken to Mount Nebo, and from there he looks at the promised land. But the tragedy is Moses is not allowed to enter into the promised land. The reason that is given is like Moses was asked by God to talk to the rock when people were there with the elders, people wanted water. God tells, go and talk to the rock. But what Moses does, Moses twice struck the rock with a rod, and that God becomes furious. Some people say this might have been a very little reason for God to be angry, because later David does words crimes, but still God is not angry. Oftentimes we are not able to understand God, but because God forgives in some instances, but God is very, very firm just in a few other instances. And that's why Moses is allowed into the promised land. But God Himself comes to bury Moses. On account of this, some people say Moses never died. Moses was taken up into the camp, like Elijah and like Enoch. There are different stories about Moses' death. But from the text of Deuteronomy, Moses dies and God buries Moses. The last thing we take from today's lecture or today's class is choose life. So the text is here. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today. I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life that you and your offspring may live. For he is your life and length of days, that you may dwell in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give them. So here, our life is not a determined, like a predetermined, predestined life. We all have freedom. We need to only choose between life and death. So that no. So we began with the why take these books together. So the key person is Moses. Moses' birth to Moses' death. Moses' birth in Exodus, Moses' death in Deuteronomy. So the person of Moses connects all these four books. And also the discourse with Moses, or has with Moses, that continues the theme. Now then we went on to see each book from Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Now we come to the final statement. The theological significance, meaning of these five books. Number one, fight for justice. Like when Moses is called and said, heard the cry of my people. I came down and God wanted to liberate. So God is a God of justice, God of liberation. Number one. Number two, God's concern for his people. God does not leave his people abandoned. He sends a liberator and he accompanies them like in the pillar of cloud of fire, and he continues to be present. God sends for because the people may be against the leader, God is always with the leader. Then Sinaitic covenant becomes the forerunner of the New Testament covenant. We have ethical and ritual codes. Even they say Code of Hammurabi and even recent our constitutions all have been influenced by the Decalogue. That's how the ethical and even the Sermon on the Mount is a way of retelling the Decalogue. That's how the First Testament is influencing Second Testament. Then, last but one, God's sovereignty over history. God continues to be the hero in the history. He takes control of the history. Finally, we have love of God and love of neighbor. So these are the messages that we carry from these four books. Now, coming to the assessment that you have at the end of your lesson, kindly note we have two sections. The first one is objective type. We have number one, Ramses, the king of Egypt. The answer is suppressed them. Then Moses means to draw out. The 11 wonders are performed in Egypt by Moses, Aaron, and God. So here we have put 11 because when you calculate in some versions it comes 10 plagues in 11. So there's 11. God also acts, reacts, speaks through natural events. So if you say like the plagues are natural events, we can interpret like God also speaks through natural events. Then number five, the people of Israel were wandering in the desert for 40 years because 40 years means one generation. Like God continues to operate through one generation. So the new generation comes when they enter into the promised land. Number six, The desert for the Israelites is both a place of punishment and blessing because they murmur against God and Moses, they are punished. On the other hand, they experience the presence of God. That's how it becomes their blessing. Then, number 7, what is the important code of the book of Exodus? Code of the covenant. Then, 8, who were not allowed to enter into the promised land? Moses. 9, what is the important feast connected with Exodus? Paschal feast. 10, what is the last station of the Israelites in the wilderness journey? Kadesh. Because only here Moses is addressing the people gathered at Kadesh Barnea. And after this, under the leadership of Joshua, they enter into the promised land. The last section you have paragraph questions. Number 1, describe the theological implication of the call of Moses. You have in the textbook. Write a short note on the great signs. Write a short note on the 10 commandments. What are the themes of wilderness? What is the theological meaning of crossing over the sea? And what is the special insistence of the Deuteronomic laws? That is ethical and moral code. And that concludes our lesson.